Good morning. My name's Gary Matsuoka, and this is the Laguna Hills Nursery in Santa Ana. And this morning's class is going to be on growing apricots, apriums, and cherries. So these are some of our favorite fruits. Now, cherries is the one we're still not totally sure which one is the best. Apricots we pretty much know from the years we've been growing them. Now all these trees, anyone here not familiar with what chill requirements in winter mean? Okay, so all stone fruits and pear trees among fruit trees need a winter, a certain amount of winter. And what happens is the flower buds on the plants and the leaf buds too have to be exposed to a certain amount of cold in the winter to make them develop properly and then open up when the weather warms up properly. They did this because they all evolved in a southern temperate climate, not like in Canada or Siberia where it never gets cold, never gets warm in the winter, but in place, most of these come from Eurasia or China, where it's just like Tennessee or Georgia in the United States, where you can get a spat of 70 degrees in the middle of January, and we don't want them to wake up yet. So they have to have so many hours of chill, and that chill means temperatures below 55, above 34. If you go too cold, apparently no chemical reactions occur in there, and it doesn't experience that cold, but right between 34 and 55. Now, the old model showed it between 34 and 45, but we don't get much temperature between 34 and 45. So they had to redo the models and said, well, okay, it's a bell curve. You get a little bit of chill at 34, you get the most at around 44, you get less as you get toward 55. Less on both ends, real high in the middle. So, you get a lot of 44, 45 degree weather, you get a lot of chill. If you get about 55 degrees, you don't get much chill at all at those hours. It accumulates over time. You tend to lose chill if the days get too warm. But right now, with this weather, this is slightly below average weather for Orange County this time of year. We're building up a few hours of chill every night because the days are only getting into the low 60s. The nights are getting down into about the mid 40s. So we are accumulating a little bit of chill right now. Whenever we had those storms coming through a few weeks ago, 55 in the day, 48 at night, you're getting a lot of chill. You're getting 24 hours worth, although it's not worth 24 hours, it may only be worth about 10 or 12 hours per day. But still, we're accumulating a lot of chill. When the days stay below 60, you get a lot of chill. Now, depending on where your neighborhood is, there's, like in Orange County in general, the stone fruits get more chill by the big rivers and in the canyons. And that's because cold air flows like water. It's heavier than warm air, it tends to drop. So even though on the mountains nearby, the air is a lot colder at altitude, just because it's thinner. I mean, it's colder, we feel colder because the air is thinner. You don't get as much friction from air molecules, so you're colder, but the cold air sinks off those mountains into the canyons below them, and it flows to the ocean along the riverbeds. So the bigger the river, the colder it is. If you live anywhere near Santa Ana River, within a few blocks of it, San Juan Creek, LA River, San Gabriel River, all the big rivers here get really cool in the wintertime and stay cool most of the day. So anyone who lives by those rivers knows that. We have some friends who have nurseries along the riverbeds, and they are always worried about frost. Whereas right here, we rarely see it. So there's microclimates that way in Orange County along all the rivers. Even if you live near a drainage ditch or near a little stream bed, you're still going to get colder than the guys nearby. I had a friend who has a property down in San Diego County, and he's by a riverbed. He says his property dropped off 50 foot from top to bottom, and he has about a 20-degree difference from top to bottom of his property in the middle of winter, from the top to the bottom. So he plants his cherry trees at the bottom, plants his bananas at the top. So essentially he owns the side of a little hill. So that's.
And now I apologize, I came in late. You know, I've gotten used to 45 being kind of the cutoff for low chill, but
Right.
I see a lot of nights. I live in Huntington Beach where I am, 48 or so. Are you still getting chill value out of that, or does it have to get to the 45?
No, you still get, so the Utah model, I guess they did it in a controlled environment greenhouse, runs from 34 to 55.
Okay.
So it's a bell curve in there. You get more chill around, I think they said you get the most chill at 44, which is probably more than an hour for every hour you spend there. Like they said, it's 1 hour between 34 and 45, and that was the original model. But nothing's a box like that. It's a bell curve. So they said, okay, you get more than 1 hour chill per every hour you spend right around 45, less as you go toward 55 and 34. So that's what the professor told me, but I haven't seen that many other calculations on chill. But we know it can't be below 45 and that's it, because near the beach you would never get any chill.
Right.
But they do, and they get a lot of it, so they're getting it all the way up to 55 degrees. So these trees need it. The less they need, because we're marginally low chill area here. I would tell you the average, if it was 20 years ago, I'd tell you the average is 350. Lately, it's been less than 300 hours of chill for the general area. Again, by the riverbeds, you're probably getting 400 hours. On the hilltops, maybe 200 or less. But the average has been a little less than 300. If you go back to 2014, 2015, 2016, we couldn't even break 100, 150. It was really, they claimed we only had 80 hours one of those years, but most of our fruit trees still work, so we know it's more than that. They were using a different model. So you have to watch that. So you want to choose fruit trees with lower chill numbers. The other thing that we have to worry about in Orange County that's unique to our area is we don't get much sun until July or until summer starts. So if you get a fruit tree ripening in May, wakes up real early because it doesn't need much chill, and then it ripens in May and there's no sun, the quality is not as good as if it would ripen, say, start of summer. Once summer starts, we get more sunlight, we get more heat, the fruit reaches its potential sweetness better. Now the other thing, I was going to mention one more thing. In your own yard, if you're planting fruit trees, there are microclimates in the yard also. If you're on a slight slope, and if you have a house, and say this is south and this is north, there's two things the house can do for you. In wintertime, the sun is lower in the sky, and the house projects a big shadow on the north side. This area is a few degrees cooler on the south side where the sun can get in. And that makes pretty good difference on the chill that this side is, because we're so marginal here. Just a 1 or 2 degree difference during the day can make a huge difference in the chill. So the north side gets more chill on the south side. And then in the summertime, the sun is about here. The shadow is only a percentage of what it was in the winter. So you can get fruit trees fairly close to the house on the north side and get better chill, a lot better than the south side. Or another side of a wall, if you had just a regular wall, or some shade trees that are evergreen, the north side of these two would also be a little bit cooler. The other thing that's been done in orchards in San Jose, when Silicon Valley moved in the 80s, 70s, 80s, they said the night temperatures were warming up like 9 degrees because of all the factories there. So they, in their last ditch effort to keep the cherry trees blooming, they painted them white. So if you paint the buds white, they reflect the heat. So it is the temperature of the branches and the buds themselves, not the soil temperature. Now the other thing to know too, the shorter you keep the branches on your tree, the shorter you keep your tree in general, the more cold it experiences, because cold air does settle. And if you walk through neighborhoods that have any elevation at all in the wintertime, you'll notice as you go down a few feet, your legs suddenly feel colder. So near the ground, you can be 5 degrees colder at ground level than 10 feet off the ground. So if you can keep your fruiting branches short on your tree, that's going to help it fruit better too. We notice on years when there is less chill, the bottom branches of my fruit trees were the only parts that have fruit. When we had really good chill, I mean, some years we did have some really nice chill, the top branches produce most fruit because they get more sun. But if they don't get chill up there, they don't make any fruit at all. So then it's the bottom branches. So we've seen that. So on the north side here, if you plant a fruit tree, say right about here, and keep it short, your house is fairly tall, it'll get sun in the summer when the fruit's ripening. So most stone fruits, the nice thing about them, most of the trees that require chill, pears and stone fruits, ripen in the summer when the sun's higher. So you can actually put them on the north side so they get shade in the winter and sun in the summer. South side, save it for bananas, papayas, avocado trees. If the tree requires, it needs sun in the fall to ripen, then you better not put it on the north side. You won't get any sun, although we've seen a lot of citrus do well there. Now, our temperatures have been rather warm. The earth warmed a lot between they said between 1930s and 1990s, the entire globe warmed up. It's cooled off slightly since, according to the people who do better research. But the oceans are still warm, which kind of messes us up sometimes. The ocean water is warmer right now. It's slower to react to the temperatures, so it's staying warm and causing us some warmer winters here as we get close to 2020. But supposedly in the next 5 years, we're going to see a dramatic decrease in temperature. Now, over the cycles, the weather's gone up and down. I mean, when we were in Lake Forest, we had learned that the neighborhood where we were located at was an apricot orchard in the 19-teens. Royal apricots were grown right in the middle of Lake Forest, or El Toro at that time. And they were so successful in the 19-teens that they dried the fruit and sent them to the soldiers in World War I in Europe. 1920s, apricots had 4 years in a row of crop failures. They pulled them all out because it was too warm. The winters got too warm all of a sudden. They pulled them out, planted orange trees, and when we moved to Lake Forest in the 1960s, the orange trees were there. So, and then in the 1980s, early 80s, really hot winters at that time, just like 2014, 2016, 2015. We were throwing away peaches and nectarines and apricots because they wouldn't wake up. It was June, they weren't even doing anything, so we just thought they must be dead, threw them away. And then the late 80s, we were in a different zone totally. It's like we're suddenly in zone 8, where we're 30 degrees to 35 degrees every night in December and January for 4 or 5 years in a row. In fact, in that span of years, we hit our coldest temperatures ever recorded in California. Lake Forest hit 23, San Francisco 13, Escondido 13 degrees, 2 days in a row, about 4 hours each. Just incredible cold at that time. Then a warm slide in the 1990s, stayed that way through the early 2000s, but 4 or 5 years ago we had that warm spell. So now it feels more normal this winter. We think we've gotten close to 200 hours of chill so far. We need a good cool week, which you might get next week when the storms move in, and that might bring us to about 250, 260, and then a few more weeks we'll get to 300, and then the apricots and cherries will be very happy. So our apricot trees generally 300 to 350 hours seems to be the magic number for them. They all seem to do pretty well if we get to that. Cherries, I don't know, our cherry trees, we're not sure what chill they need, because I've grown a cherry for many, many years and it's never not bloomed. Even on the warmest winters we had, it still bloomed like a snowball. So we're not positive what's going on with the cherry trees. Well, anyway, care-wise with these, right now, pretty much we only have bare root. That's something I'm saving to see when it blooms. But the bare root trees, these two are considered the same size from our grower. They charge the same price for them, but you can see this looks like a full-grown tree in miniature, and this looks like a stick. Now, in the old days when we got bare root, they all came to us looking like this. The growers really didn't know how to make them do this. Now they do. I'm not sure what exactly they do, so they might be trimming them a few months after they graft them or something to make them do that. But we don't get, well, we still get a lot like this, but we get a lot like this, which we like better. So we want trees, again, to branch fairly low. Now, commercially, the smaller trees that farms plant are always looking like this. They always buy the less expensive trees to put in orchards. Since you're planting, thousands and thousands and thousands of trees. This may only be about 50, 60 cents difference. However, to an orchard, that's a lot of money, and within a year, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between these two. It's just that this one, we have to do some training. So if you bought a tree like this and you want it to branch here, you've got to cut it to here when you plant it. And then the top 4 or 5 buds sprout and grow branches, and then you train it from there. If you leave it like this, it grows from here. So your branching is starting about 5 feet off the ground. You put this in the ground, you're going to lose about a foot. So this is all from 5 foot and up, and your fruit is way up there, and you don't get as much chill because the branches are real high off the ground. So it's better to cut them, the orchards will cut them at knee height to get the branching starting at knee height. I'd say for homeowners, you might like the look of waist height a little better, 2.5 feet off the ground. But that's up to you. The lower, the better. Apricots generally are trained into kind of a fan or a vase, not an open vase, but just, I would say fan. If you want to say fan, the branches going up and out. Some other fruit trees train differently, but generally what they do is they develop really tiny fruiting spurs. These are too young to have them, seeing if there's any sign of it. But what they get is off their, as on this cherry tree here, they start making these little short branches off the ones that are going up and out. Little short branches that have leaves and flower buds. And they do that, and those little spurs can last several years on the plant. So the plant's got to keep growing to keep making fruiting wood. What happens if you want to keep this thing about, and for homeowners, I would say less than 10 feet tall, 5, 6 feet wide, or maybe 8 foot wide is fine. Now, what we know about fruit trees in general, so what's been discovered about fruit trees is the most productive size of a fruit tree of any type is a fruit tree that's perhaps 5 feet wide, and they say dome shape, but it's real hard to do domes on fruit trees. So kind of a Christmas tree form. So that might be 8 foot, 10 foot tall, 5 foot wide. And the reason for that is that on fruit trees in general, you have 2.5 foot of leaves and it's dense growth. Sunlight's not going to go any deeper than that. So if you have a tree that's, the conventional trees were about 20 foot across, it was a shell of fruit being formed with nothing in the middle. Whereas if you keep them right around 5 foot across, you'll be fully productive to the trunk of that tree, and you'll have more fruit per acre. But that means you got to put in like 9 times as many trees to fill the same space as one tree used to. But now what that means also, well, you can plant 9 kinds of fruit trees in there in the space of one. And the other thing it means is if you had one fruit tree that was 20 foot across, That's like 500 pieces of fruit, and you got 2 weeks to eat it. Because most of the stone fruit ripen in about 2 weeks. So you got to gobble them down or give them away or find some way to get rid of it. But if it's only 5 foot wide, that's maybe between 50 to 80 fruit, or 50 to maybe 100 fruit on this tree. And you might be able to find people that will take that, and your family might be able to eat them.
Well, and, you know, up in the Columbia River, all the recent plantings along the Columbia east of Wenatchee are on trellises now.
Right.
They're not even messing with trees.
Right.
Everything's trained.
Everything's getting smaller,
Yeah.
smaller and smaller. So anyway, we do these as freestanding trees. There are some trees that require trellising, mainly apples and pears. But anyway, so keep them small. So keep them pruned. Now, if you keep pruning to this size, what happens is they get denser and denser and denser, and then they can't put on any new wood. So then what you have to do is, say 3 or 4 years from now, you look in there, if you got branches real close together, you thin them out. You take out branches entirely, leave gaps maybe a foot between the tips of the branches so that they can still grow new growth within this zone. Otherwise, the only way they can get new growth is to grow bigger on you. But if you want to keep them small and productive, you've got to thin out the areas between the branches in the wintertime. Now in the summertime, you do all the size control. So summertime, the stone fruits we're talking about, they don't put any, they put on the new growth on what was here last year. Summertime, they keep doing this on you. No fruit on that. So you just keep cutting that off. All summer long, you cut off what you don't want going sky high. And in the wintertime, you come in here and thin it out. Summertime, they're not making any flowers for next year. Fall is when they do that. So you trim off anything too tall in the summer. They stop growing the first day of fall. They suddenly stop growing, and then they start creating all their flower buds within this area. And in the winter, you thin it out so they can make new stuff, new growth in the spring.
That might all apply to like citrus and avocado as well.
Yeah, pretty much. You can use it generally. Yeah, citrus orchards, I mean, it's usually automated now. So, you know, you drive through the orchards in the summertime, you see these trucks. In fact, I know a lady whose family is the people who developed those, who created those trucks with the saws on the sides. So they just drive through the orchard and saw the branches, automatic, and they bevel them all summer long. They made a lot of money on that. They're the ones that own Mission Viejo, or own, they started Mission Viejo company. So they made a lot of money with those trucks. Okay.
And I'm sorry to follow up on his.
Mhm.
I've got an avocado.
Mhm.
The top now is about 20 feet tall, about 15 years old. And like you said, the interior, when it gets really hot, we go in there and sit and, drink our cocktail, right? Would it be good to cut that back and sacrifice
Mhm.
a year or two of fruit?
Well, they do that. That's a different class. But what they used to do, and I've done this just to see if it worked, you take a chainsaw and cut it down to a 4-foot stump, and then it regrows. Do that in the winter, paint it white so it doesn't sunburn, and then it regrows its top to about 8 by 8 within the next year.
So now would be a good time to do that. 'Cause
And then just keep it the size. Don't let it get 20 foot anymore. Just keep it down to about 10, 12 foot. But it's better to do that than to chop and leave a big stump like that. Okay, forgot to mention. So when you plant bare root trees, generally you don't do anything to your dirt. Especially don't buy anything called planter mix. Planter mix, I don't know, we have to do well, they're not going to, sue all the companies that make planter mix to mend the soil with compost, because that's the worst thing you can ever put with plant roots, is compost in the ground. It doesn't belong there. It belongs on the surface of the soil. Compost is basically dead, rotten trees ground up to real fine. You put that in the ground. It creates a lot of fungus. get a lot of root rot. I mean, a dead tree is where fungus and bacteria live. It's not the home for tree roots. And all the organisms that live in compost want to eat your tree roots. Don't do it. Just dig a hole, drop it in. The only time that won't work is if you had a stone fruit there within the last 10 years. So if you have an old peach tree, apricot, or anything related, you pull it out of the ground, the ground's got rotten, dying tree roots. It's not a huge volume of soil, so plant roots usually make up about 1% of this volume of the soil, but it's just like saying, okay, my grandparents died, we chopped up the body in little million bits, and then we're putting a baby in that same room. Well, it doesn't help to have any remnants of a relative nearby. So in order to make that soil where an old peach tree was suitable for this apricot tree, you want to make a hole. Now in orchards, they're instructed to make a hole 3 foot wide, 1.5 foot deep, replace it with clean dirt from another part of the orchard that wasn't near another apricot tree or something. And that will grow a tree 10 by 10 very quickly. You may not need it to be that big, so let's say do a 2 by 2 area, 1 foot deep, replace that dirt with either sand, soil from another part of your garden, or bags of top pot will work. So you have to be careful. Most potting soils are 90% or more organic, which means there's nothing permanent to that potting soil. It's all going to turn into air or sludge within a few years. Our potting soils we made to be, this is 2/3 permanent material. So it really, you don't see much shrinkage at all when we use our soils, and it's not ground up wood in here either. So this won't rot the trees. We grow all our trees, that tree's growing in our top potting soil. So they do quite well in there. The sales rep from Dave Wilson he's mentioned to me every time he comes in, our trees look better and bigger than any nursery he's ever been to where their trees are being grown, because everybody else tries to grow them in ground up wood because they were told to do that by the universities. So, well, not wood, bark. Bark is the main thing that they're supposed to be using. But it's not really healthy for the roots because it's a dead tree. It doesn't belong there. It belongs in the neighborhood because it's part of the ecosystem of the tree, but it's not the root's home. It's the home for fungus and bacteria, who then provide the nutrition for the tree roots. So keep that hole clean. They say when they're planting an orchard, they have 2 guys digging the hole, 1 guy drops the tree in, the 2 guys put the whole tree back. 20 seconds, they said. They're trying, they got thousands of plants, so they're working really fast as they go through the orchard and plant those trees. So you don't need to take much time, but you do need to plant it properly. Let me pull this one out. So all these trees we're selling are grafted. So you look at the roots. If you find any things that's severely cracked or even split, it's nice to cut it off right where that happens. This looks pretty intact, so we'll leave it alone. Sometimes if you shake and you see something flopping around, it's not good, but this looks pretty good. This is the rootstock, and they grafted the apricot we want right at this point, and usually they grafted about 3 or 4 inches above soil level, so the original soil level is right here. Now, just so you know, the trees aren't super sensitive if your soil is decent. You can plant it from about here all the way up to here, and it'll make it. Because I planted a bunch of fruit trees once this deep in decent soil. It wasn't the best soil in the world, but it was decent, and nothing happened. But the original soil level was right about here. So you plant it there, you water it thoroughly, you make a hole deep enough to get all these roots in. Now, again, if you haven't planted these recently in your area, you got no worries. What we do know is that if you've had peaches here, nectarines, or anything related roots, then if you have any wounds that you make, sometimes you put them in the ground, they catch a disease from the dead bodies around them that are related. So that's another reason it's nice to put in some clean dirt of some sort, because the little cuts you make in the roots, or else, cut them a day before, leave them in the bag overnight so that cut has time to close up before you stick in the ground. Because we found that with roses a lot. If you have existing rose bed, you put a new rose in there, you make a cut anywhere in contact with that dirt, they get cankers forming on the cuts because of diseases that are existing in the rose bed. So just watch that. Now, it's got a little dog leg to it because it's grafted on one side. So if we have 110 degrees, this area is subject to sunburn. So if this is south, face it this way so the sun can't hit anything. If you face it that way, the sun can hit that little dog leg there and potentially burn it, or you just paint it white. It's fine. But you can face those south, and then they can't touch anything. It doesn't happen too often. We haven't seen much sunburning here, but if you're in Riverside or Fresno, it's more common there if you do that. And again, we'll cut it at the time you plant it to the height you want the first layer of branches to form. It's nice to do pruning on stone fruits when the branches are smaller. So if in a couple years this trunk is this big and you do the same cut, you make a much bigger wound in the tree that doesn't heal very well. Stone fruits do not heal their wounds very well. So if you prune a tree, especially if the tree, once it gets 5 years down, 10 years down the road like this, make a cut in there, you've got a dead area going down the roots that size. That's how bad they do when they don't seal well. Apricots tend to live around 30, 40 years, and usually they're productive up to the moment they just collapse and fall over. So I remember when I was a kid, my neighbor had an apricot tree, and one day the thing just broke, and we looked inside and it was all termite holes. We thought termites killed it. No, it wasn't the termites, it's the pruning that does that. Termites do not eat living wood, they eat dead wood. So termites keep the tree alive as long as possible because they eat the dead wood so that the fungus doesn't get and wipe out the tree that way. So termites and trees are friends. Termites in houses aren't friends, but termites in plants in general are good for each other. That's why there's so many termites in this world. They're keeping all the plants from dying an early death as they build up dead wood. So, okay, and then water it once. Now the first time you water it, the dirt's going to settle. So what I like to do is, you make your nice watering basin, water it thoroughly, hold the trunk straight. As it settles, it might settle wobbly, but hold the trunk straight. You can even vibrate the trunk a little bit to help the dirt settle around the roots. But hold it just for that initial watering so that it settles straight. Because sometimes it just starts leaning after you do it. In a container, it's easy to fix. We just get it real soggy, wet again, hold the trunk, vibrate the pot, tap it a little bit, and all the dirt kind of moves around the trunk. And then you can make it straight again. The ground, you'll have to, it's nice to just anchor it while it's there. I mean, the tree doesn't care if you make it perfectly straight, but visually it looks a lot better if it's straight. So, and now in a farm, they wouldn't fertilize these trees the first year. They don't really want them to grow too fast. They're stronger if they grow slower. But in your own garden, I would say put, one of the fruit tree fertilizers. You don't have to put a lot around them. A cup or so of an organic or just a pinch of a chemical fertilizer, because generally in your yard there's too much competition. In a farm, they make sure ahead of time the ground is not totally sterile and the trees go in and that's it. They only have trees, whereas in your yard you've got maybe eucalyptus tree next door that's stealing all the nutrients from your tree, or the grass nearby stealing the nutrients. So you want to make sure they have a little bit. So we'll put a little bit down. I mean, generally you don't want your trees to grow. We don't have any problem with these trees growing big. We have trouble keeping them at a size where you can pick it. And just keep them at a reasonable size. They tend to grow quite fast. Yes?
Can we just rewind a minute? The bare roots I brought from you this year are replacements for trees that were murdered by Roundup. So there are rotting roots. I'm going got a flavor grenade going right back into where the flavor grenade died. I got a burgundy next to it in a tight box.
Mm-hmm.
The roots coming in from the living tree to the side. Is it okay to clip those?
Okay, so yeah, you made a good point. So, yeah, so if you're replacing a tree, any dirt you dig out of the hole to put this in, you don't want to reuse it.
Right.
You can make that hole fairly big. The rule of thumb on trees nearby and their roots is you don't want to touch a root within 3 trunk diameters of this trunk.
Oh, okay.
That's not too far. I mean, if the tree is only about this big, that might be 1.5 inches, well, let's say 2 inches, then you got to stay 6 inches away from that trunk if you're carving a hole.
So a 2 foot by 2 foot hole should be plenty.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the root structures of the bare roots I got were nice. They're this big, so I'll at least go that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, so any surrounding trees that you're trying to eliminate the soil from, you have to stay 3 trunk diameters from the trunk. That's a general rule with all trees and plants. You know, you see those whenever they move those huge like when they moved the huge oak trees from the Great Park, you saw these 7-foot boxes that they used for trunks that were like this. It still looks too small, but they didn't lose that many of those trees. That's the rules that the arborists use. Okay, so these trees don't get that many bugs or diseases in this area, at least. I've only seen with the normal apricots we sell. I've only ever had 1 apricot with the worm in it. Over hundreds of apricots I've eaten, I found 1 with the worm. So worms getting to the fruit is not that critical. If you want, if you just want to make sure, you can spray them with like Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew sometime during the spring to kill the critters that cause the worms. I mean, the worms that get into the apricot are the worms that we see a lot in peaches and nectarines. Same worm. Apricots ripen too early for that worm in general, so they don't get in. But if you wanted to spray it just to make sure, you can. We generally don't have any winter diseases to spray, so we don't usually put a dormant spray on them. I think up in the orchard areas they do, especially near the coast where they might have some trouble, but we haven't seen anything. So we don't usually spray in the wintertime on these for anything. We do try to keep the ants under control. Ants cause a lot of bug problems in the trees, so control the ants. This is our best ant control, Amdro, but we have organic ones also. This is not organic, but it works really, really well. The organic ones are fine. You just have to they just are more expensive in the long run because you have to keep using those. This one, if you use this real good in your yard once, sometimes you don't see ants for 3 or 4 years. This wipes out the entire neighborhood's colonies.
And the Captain Jack's is going to have one.
Right, for the worms.
They made more than one product.
One bug we do see, I forgot to mention. The problem with this bug is you rarely ever catch it, but usually in May or June, there's not many holes in this leaf. So there is a bug called a cherry slug, which is the same bug as a pear slug, same bug as it's a critter that the larvae can look slimy, although on cherry trees, I don't know if they look slimy. They look like little caterpillars, but they're the larva of a sawfly, which is a type of wasp that doesn't sting. And they eat leaves on cherry trees, occasionally on plums, occasionally on apricots, but mostly cherries. So if you start seeing holes in your leaf, especially near the bottom of the tree, start seeing holes, and that's the pear slug or cherry slug or whatever you want to call it. Only 1 generation a year. And the book says by the time you notice the problem, they're gone for the year. So you really don't have to spray. I mean, you occasionally catch the bug on there. It's hard to see them. They're kind of greenish, but they look like little caterpillar on the bottom. They don't do a lot of damage, and there's only one generation, so it's not that big a deal. I rarely ever catch them on time. I go there and in July, I see the holes, look for the bugs, they're gone already. So now we do have a lot of problems with birds, rats, mice, squirrels. For that, we sell this stuff, but the scarecrow owl works for about 2 days. Now, the fruit's up there for about 2 weeks in the ripening period, so you need something probably that works a little longer than that. The products that work quite a while for us, the scarecrow snake. You blow that up and hang it in the tree. I mean, when I heard about that snakes would scare birds, this was back in the 1980s. I had 20 fig trees with all with fruit and like an aviary out there. Went to one of the theme parks here, and they had a big rubber snake, real big one, really nice looking rubber snake. Threw that up in the fig tree. Didn't hear a bird for 2 weeks. They didn't like that at all. This one's not quite as scary looking, but if you move it around your yard, they may not get used to it. The other one is bird scare tape, Mylar. They use this a lot in the orchards, especially in the vineyards. But the best way to handle this is to string it between branches for long distances, horizontally. What happens is that when you string it horizontally, especially when it's real long, there's silver on one side, red on the other. Any breeze at all, it flips it back and forth real slowly, and the silver and red just zing back and forth across your yard. It drives the birds nuts to see that movement going back and forth, even though it's just doing this. That motion is really fast. They don't like that at all. If you just hang this, it doesn't do as much. You stretch it across for distance, and that motion, you look at a vineyard with all this on there, and it drives you, you get dizzy watching the flashing going back and forth. Now, another person said even better than this, a Mylar balloon. I don't know if they last 2 weeks on the tree, though, but they said Mylar balloons, the birds just don't like those things. So, now if you have rats and mice, we always say double bubble gum. Put it out there. That's the safest way to kill rats and mice and gophers. They eat it, doesn't digest, they can't vomit, they just starve to death in a few days. There are poisons too, but they're not as safe. Squirrels are the most difficult ones. It's almost like you have to trap them and take them away. It's easy to trap them, and then you're not supposed to drive them away or anything, but we do. So, or an air rifle if your neighbor doesn't mind. Okay, let's go over some of the varieties. So back in the 60s and 70s, the only apricot we ever sold here was Royals. And they're also known as Blenheim because it's the same tree developed in England. But they need about 350 hours of chill. So, and that's considered the best quality apricot out there. You can grow Royals if you live near one of the big rivers or in a canyon anywhere. I mean, it's pretty impressive how the canyons just in this local mountain range get. Because we have a customer who lives up there, and they said, oh, around December they get down into the teens. And they're just, a few miles, a mile from Mission Viejo. It's crazy how cold those canyons get. I mean, they don't, like in that area, they got the San Juan Creek. And that creek bed is really cold. Our friends own the plant depot down there, and they have to cover their bedding plants with row cover cloth to keep them from freezing at night. It's just crazy right along that riverbed. When we had that record frost back in 1990 it was, they hit 15 degrees. So anyway, Royal Blenheims need 350 hours, so they haven't worked all that well unless you're in a canyon. The one we sold for the last 20, 25 years is gold kissed. That needs around 300. I would say a little more than 300. They didn't do well this last year. They did a little bit, but not a huge crop for us this last year. But right around 300 hours. So we sold that from the 1980s, about 85 or so. That was our best apricot at that time. The fruit's not considered very good compared to other apricots, especially compared to Royal. But when I grew that in my yard, I didn't throw away a single one. I mean, even if the fruit fell on the ground and split, I just carved off the dirty areas and ate them. So almost any apricot I've ever eaten, I've loved it. They're all much better than what you buy in the store. There's Flora Gold, which we ordered this year, couldn't get them. They couldn't get enough to us. That's 300 hours. And then there's Tropic Gold. Now they're saying it's 350, but this is the one that's made fruit every year we've had it. Every year we've had it, the tree has made some fruit. So in 2014, 2015, 2016, they woke up at the right time. They made a few fruit those years. The Gold Kiss and the Flora Gold did not wake up in the spring at all. What they did is they just stayed dormant. We thought, these things are dead. August, put out a few leaves on each branch. That's it for the year on those. They did not perform well with less than 100 hours to chill. They just weren't doing anything. Tropic Gold still woke up right time. Not much fruit, but they still made some. So they were acting normally. All Tropic Gold is a branch from a royal orchard that woke up 2 weeks earlier than the rest of the orchard. They cut it off and called it Tropic Gold. So we think these apricots are better quality than these two because it was a sport off of royal. So we think the chill on this is less than 300 hours, even though their literature says it's 350. Now, these are the three we ordered this year. We got 2 of them in stock. Tropic Gold again is the one we'd recommend the most. There is another apricot that I've had a lot of fruit on, and that's Autumn Royal. But, and the literature says it's like 400 hours. But this thing at my house, and we were on a hilltop, which is the worst place to grow an apricot, even in those hot winters, the thing produced a big crop. We think the chill on this is way less than 300. But the problem is we couldn't eat any of the fruit. So the problem with this is it ripens in August. And all these other ones, about the same time, June into July. And the problem with apricots is they don't like the heat. The fruit is so small that it heats up a lot when it's hot weather. And they said the seed itself is what gets hot. And it actually cooks the rest of the fruit. So in August, my autumn roll, they all look cooked. All the fruit up there looks cooked. The worms are in them. It's like, I can't eat any of these, but it's got a whole bunch of them. Well, we think if you're right on the coastline in Newport or Huntington, where it doesn't get hot, this will work quite well because we've never seen it miss a year. So we don't know the proper story on Autumn Royal. Now they've brought out another one, fall, that has to do with fall. It's supposed to ripen in September. But this one we've grown just as a lark, and we've never seen it not miss a year on fruit. But you have to be in a certain spot. Now we don't carry this. If you wanted it real bad, I might order some. But it's a good one if you live in an area where the summers aren't hot. Either that or you'd have to shade every single fruit on the tree in aluminum foil on there to keep the sun from heating up that pit. Any questions on the apricot? Oh, I'll mention their literature says Katy will do well here. And Katie's a pretty good tasting apricot according to literature. We haven't seen it do anything in the places we've been. We've had them for like 4, 5, 6 years in the ground. No fruit, no flowers. But the reports were along the rivers in Orange County, they're doing real well. So they're getting, it's probably around 400 hours of chill maybe. The book says 250, but we've never seen this fruit. So we think it's probably 400, and the people in Orange County by the big Santa Ana River or by any other low spots are getting fruit on it. So it can work, again, in little microclimates. We tried Garden Annie also. Garden Annie was supposed to be a genetic dwarf apricot, so it stays small by itself. So apricot trees, if you don't prune them, tend to grow about between 15 and 20 foot by 15 and 20 foot. Again, you can keep them down below 10. Gold Kiss is hard to control. Among all the apricots we've grown, Gold Kiss can grow 6 feet in a year. About 3 times faster than any other apricot according to the literature. All the rest, 2 or 3 feet. It's easy to control them. You just cut off 2 or 3 feet. But Gold Kiss, at my last house, it was a 15 by 15 foot tree. I tried to keep it down to 8. Every year it would go right back up to 15. It was just hard to stop it from getting back up to that height. And we were cutting off branches this fat. It was just crazy how fast that thing grew.
Is there anything to the stories that they produce every year?
No, I don't think so. Because when we had those cold winters, it was a crop every year. I mean, we rarely have those winters every year, but if you have the winter, they seem to be productive every year. Generally, tangerines are the worst at that. Heavy crop one year, no crop the next. Avocados too. Avocados, if there's fruit on the branch this year, that branch is not blooming the next year because the fruit takes over a year to ripen. So avocados definitely, the branch the fruit's on can't flower the next year. But yeah, we had so many years of apricots in our yard, fabulous years, and then nothing. Now, we sell our stone fruit on different rootstocks, and the tag, this is the name tag of the tree, this is the name tag of the rootstock. We like to stay with the standard rootstocks, the ones that allow them to grow big, because they are also more drought tolerant. They can take the drier soil better. The citation rootstock, the other one, has a pink tag. I might have a few trees out there on pink tags. What we know about those is they prefer wet clay. So if you've got clay soil and it rains a lot, citation works better. But we're backing away from it because in the nursery we notice that every tree on citation rootstock goes to sleep by the end of September. Drops all its leaves. The stuff on this, on the regular rootstock, holds its leaves till December. And during the drought we had, when we backed off on the water 1 quarter, anything I had in the yard, peach, nectarine, plum, pluot, apricot, anything on citation died in the drought. Nothing else died. All my citrus made it, all my avocados made it, anything on regular rootstock made it, but the citation does not handle drought well at all.
What's the problem with it losing its leaves in September?
Maybe nothing, but that's a lot of weight. If the tree could have gotten more energy all the way into December, that would have been better. Because the first year I tried citation rootstock, I had 5 pluots on citation, and they all went to sleep in August that year. I'm going, well, they all just died. I called up Stave Wilson and said, no, you didn't water quite enough. So they went to sleep. The next year they woke up at the right time, had their crop, so they didn't die that year. And then they went to sleep in October the next year. They still a lot earlier than anything on regular rootstock, and I just don't like that. I mean, if you're maybe in Central Valley, everything might go to sleep at that time, but you're wasting, part of the time the tree could have been getting energy if it goes to sleep that early. But it's strange, even in the pots at the nursery, they do the exact same thing. They go to sleep in October, and everything else stays with green leaves till mid-December. So
what are the names of the rootstocks that you're using?
well, they offer things on certain ones. Nemagard, Myro, Mariana, those are different rootstocks. Some are peach roots, some are plum roots. but there's different kinds of rootstock. So we just don't like the citation.
For the backyard or orchard culture, they're all so close together. When I planted 3 in a 10-foot square box, I found that this was especially the Granny Smith just completely dominated the Fuji and Gala to the point that I think it killed the Gala. Is that a rootstock thing or is that a Granny Smith thing?
Don't know. I mean, certain plants, if they outgrow the other ones, will shade it enough that it might cause some problems. Or if you didn't plant them at the same time, some plants will bully others if they were planted at different times.
Exactly, yeah.
Don't know on that one.
Okay.
Okay, so this is your Apricot lineup. We carry Gold Kiss and Tropic Gold, are the two. And Tropic Gold is the one that we do recommend for our area. If you're watching us from areas with more winter, you don't have to worry about that. Get the Royal. Now, Aprium is one of those hybrids between apricots and plums. Some Apriums, well, the plants look just like apricots. You look at an Aprium tree, it looks just like an apricot, so it's mostly apricot. The fruit looks mostly like an apricot. Some of the Apriums, the fruits are a little bigger and a little bit less orange than others. The one we have this year is cotton candy. Needs about 300 hours, just like most of the apricots do. The fruit's a little bit bigger, and it's a little bit more pale, more ivory colored. Quite good. So it's not quite as apricot-y as apricots are. I've eaten other Apriums. I've eaten Flavor Delight. And this one was so much like an apricot, I was going, well, why are we carrying this? It tastes just like my other apricot trees. But, you know, so we haven't carried this year. But this one gives you a little more aroma, aromatic quality. I don't know. It's a little different than a rare apricot, so it might be worth carrying. A lot of people like it a lot. I didn't get my Leocott trees this year, which is another apricot. But last year we got some in, and we were worried about it because the chill on it was like most things, 400 hours or more, 400, 500 hours. But actually, we got it 2 years ago. And the trees that overwintered last winter were loaded, absolutely loaded at 300 hours of chill. So we think this needs less than 300 hours. And they were really big, orange. They look like apricots, but they're really big. I didn't get to eat them. My daughter took the trees to her boyfriend's home and they planted them there. And they said they were really good, so I didn't get to eat one. But I was amazed. I didn't think this was going to work here, but it seems to work. So the Leocotts, we ordered some. They didn't send our original order. I looked at their availability. They had some real skinny ones with trunks about this thick. So I'm going to bring some in and see if I can grow them and get them going. So that one looks good. And these are self-fertile. Apricots are all self-fertile, so you don't need other trees. Although Flavor Delight, they recommend you have another apricot or Aprium nearby, but they said it's self-fertile. Leocott and cotton candy, as far as I know, are self-fertile. So no need for pollination there. And care-wise, I would say the same as apricots. Haven't seen any difference that way. Now apricots, I would tell you, are the prettiest of the Apriums of the stone fruit trees. They're the most ornamental. They all bloom white, and they all have leaves that are shaped kind of like that, and they flutter in the wind nicely. So they're nice looking trees. Okay, so that's the Apriums. We brought in another one too last year. A friend of mine wanted it. Summer. I can't remember the name now. He was checking out, but he happens to live, his house, Orange Park Acres, is close to that Santiago Creek, and they seem to get really good chill there. So he can grow almost anything he wants right there. Summer Delight Aprium. They're saying 500 hours or less. Of course, the Apricot, they said 500 hours or less also. So we might have to try that Summer Delight too and see if it works here. Now, if you're not familiar with the Zyger breeder company, they do most of the breeding work that Dave Wilson uses on these stone fruits. And so they cross plants that normally won't cross in nature, although it sometimes works. So they'll, normally you can't cross apricots and plums. And the reason is not because the embryo doesn't form, it's because the seed and the fruit around the embryo can't develop properly because of that cross. That's the main thing. So the fruit never develops, there's no seed in it, so the cross doesn't work. But the embryo is there, and it dies. So it's Zyger. Zyger is a family of that does genetic breeding work up in the Central Valley. So it's not GMO. Well, it is. Well, it's not. Well, it's natural GMO. So they make a weird cross, and they said they go into the flower right after that and save the embryo that's there, put it in a petri dish and grow it, and that's how you get the Apriums, Pluots, all these weird things, Peacotums, peach apricot, crosses. So they saved the embryos, whereas the seed would never develop, and they get these things, and a lot of them are fertile and make fruit. So they're doing a lot of that weird. They're not doing what the GMO people do, where they take genes from other organisms and stick them in there. There is still the stone fruit crosses. Now, Luther Burbank, who worked on stone fruit in the 1890s, 1900s, he claimed back then he crossed apricot and a plum, and no one believed him until they did the genetic work, and he actually did it. So it's been done before. Cherries. So back in the 60s and 70s, my father carried Bing and Black Tartarian, which are the famous cherries that everybody knows those names. Bing, Black Tartarian. Need both for cross-pollination. We never got a fruit to form. We had some fruit, or we never got a fruit to ripen. So we had a few fruit forming, because our nursery in those days was right near a riverbed. So it was a fairly cold spot in the winter, but we never got a fruit to form on any of those, so we gave up on those at that time. Didn't carry cherries for 10 years, and then in the mid-'80s, I used to buy trees from catalogs across the country. So Stark Brothers in Missouri, which is famous because they introduced the Red Delicious and the Golden Delicious apples to the U.S., they had a Stark Crimson cherry that they said would work in Zone 9. Now, in the 1980s, we were having those Zone 8 winters. So I said, well, this might work. So I bought a cherry tree from them that was called Stark Crimson. Put it in the ground in my yard, made cherries the second year. I'm going, well, this is pretty neat. What is it? So I called up Dave Wilson, and they said, well, we sell all the trees that Stark Brothers sells, we grow them for them. So it's one of our trees. They renamed it something else. So they said it could be either Craig's Crimson, Stella, or Lappins. So they sent me those 3 trees, and the second year the Lappins produced fruit. Now Lappins was developed in Canada. It's supposed to need like 700 hours of chill, but apparently it doesn't. So we started carrying Lappins. So for a long time we carried Lappins cherries, or Lapine, is what a French guy told me it's pronounced, Lapine. And we think it needs right around 300 hours. Their catalog now says 400 hours or less because we've seen it produce quite well. It never seems to make more than 100, 150 cherries though. So like 2014 in my yard, the year we had like 80 hours of chill, 90 hours of chill, whatever it was. In April or so was a big ball of white. I thought, God, this has got thousands of flowers on it. I'm going to have a real good crop this year. Made like 50. So there's something wrong with Lapins, even though it blooms real well here. Now, in the meantime, Dave Wilson brought out 2, Mini Royal and Royal Lee. This one needs 250 and this one needs around 300. This one's like a Bing type, and this is like supposed to be like a black, it's darker anyway, blacker. So Royal Lee is a little better than Mini Royal. You need both to get pollination, to get fruit. We brought them in, and then we had a real cold winter. We thought, great, it's going to be real good. Mini Royal bloomed around March, and Royal Lee bloomed around mid-April. It's like, okay, that's not working. They're more than a month apart. And Dave Olson was noticing the same thing, that they were not, you know, in the Central Valley, they were blooming around top of each other, because Central Valley, what happens, you get all your chill before it gets warm. So most of their fruit trees bloom real close together, just a week apart or so. Everything blooms because they're getting so much chill that they get their warm spell in the spring, and then everything starts waking up at the same time. Here, you know, the Mini Royal woke up 4, 5, 6 weeks before Royal Lee. Wasn't working too well down here. So they introduced Royal Crimson. To bloom between these two. And we don't know what the chill on it is. We're still trying to figure out. They came out 4 years ago. Our trees still haven't bloomed that successfully yet. It does take cherry trees a number of years to develop if they don't have the flower buds. You know, like this Royal Lee, we got it last year, it was already this big. So some of their trees come to us huge. This is the Royal Crimson coming to us like a stick. It may take 4 years for this to do what this has done in 2 years at the growing grounds. So so the order, okay, I should put down, the order of bloom is 1, 2, 3, 4. The Royal Lee and the Lapins are the better quality cherries of this group, I think. We haven't eaten this one yet, so we don't know. Mini Royal tends to be a little soft on us. This is firmer, this is firmer. And we think these two bloom 2 to 3 weeks apart, and they overlap better than these two. This one, we're still trying to figure out exactly what it's up to, because we haven't seen it bloom yet. So we don't know the bloom time on it. They claim it's in between the two, so it should be.
Yeah, mine bloom. Not a lot, small.
Yeah, we got, I think, 1 flower, but no fruit forming on it.
Yeah,
It's
and I took the flowers and sacrificed them to pollinators.
So this is supposed to be self-fertile. This is supposed to be self-fertile. These two need pollinators. Last year, a customer came in, they moved here from Connecticut. They said, we don't consider Lapins self-fertile. So in my yard, well, that might explain something. So we think now, I think there's supposed to be an S on here. We think Lapins may be partially self-fertile, and if you pair it up maybe with Royal Lee, which is the closest in bloom time, you might get a really good crop. And since these are both better than these two, or at least that one, we think that might be the better pair to go with. But we're still working on this one. Want to see what goes on here. So Mini Royal and Royal Lee may be, Mini Royal and Royal Crimson may be the best adapted to our climate. But again, I haven't seen the Lapins fail to bloom. So we're not sure on this at all what's going on. I mean, generally, if their chill is lower, they bloom earlier. But we're not sure that's true either. If Lapins always blooms, if it blooms later than these, I don't know. I just don't know. We're still working on it. Any questions on the cherries? Now, there's one cherry more we just asked Dave Wilson to send us called Brooks. University of California developed it. It's supposed to be 400 hours or less also. And if they're coming out saying 400 hours less, it may be one that'll work here. So we're going to try it out. They've been sending them to Spain and Portugal and France, some of the warmer areas there for, but University of California developed that one.
One of my cherries produces all the bottom buds, and I can hardly control it. So,
Oh, suckers, you mean, or?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a way, well, if they're coming off, yeah, are suckers coming off the branches or in the ground?
Well, suckers would come off below the graft or out of the ground.
It's above the ground, but I can't tell you it's below the ground.
Oh.
Well, I think it is. Anyway, how do you get those stopped?
Just keep pruning them.
It's aggressive.
Yeah. Yeah, if they're on the worst suckering rootstocks, if they're a plum type rootstock, I think Myro is a plum, they sucker a lot. They can sucker a lot. So I was going to check the Brooks. That's not even in their catalog. It's on their website. I can't remember if Brooks is self-fertile or not. I think it is. But we'll see. We'll try to get that in this year and see. Any questions? Cherry trees, again, not much pruning on them. They develop these spurs, that fruit. Oh, one note. One thing about cherries that is they're a little more sensitive to hot dirt than the other fruit trees are. So I remember one year we had our cherry trees in black plastic sitting on asphalt. Boy, did they look cooked. The ground doesn't warm up as much as a pot does. So the ground, especially if you have any mulch on it or plants growing on top of the ground, the soil doesn't usually top 90 degrees. A container will get the same temperature as the air. So if it's 110 degrees that day, the soil in here is 110 degrees. And the cherry trees just look terrible in that. Wood is a little better. So if you have a wood tub, wood is a little more insulating and it evaporates a bit, so it tends to keep things cooler. Or one of our farm employees who had a growing ground, and he had his own little nursery growing near Sacramento, the fabric pots stay nice and cool because they evaporate. Or you can say clay, red clay pots would evaporate a little bit. Or else dig a hole in the ground and drop your pot in the ground, and then it stays as cool as the soil does. So that's one thing about cherries. Apricots don't seem to be as sensitive to that, but cherry trees, if the root system overheats, they look pretty bad, and they'll stay bad the rest of the year. They don't seem to recover too well from the heat shock to the roots. So, okay, any questions today? Yes.
Tell us about watering, how much water and when.
Good question. Generally, crops in general, the soil, they don't like the soil to ever be dry. And what that means is you can come around with a piece of rebar, something this thick, or a wood dowel, and wherever you're watering your tree, you can stick it in the ground by hand. You can push it in at least a foot, and if you have real sandy soil, a foot and a half. If you can push it in the ground a foot and a half, the ground's wet that deep. If you can push it in 3 feet, the ground is wet 3 feet. Well, most of these trees come from areas of the world that don't have droughts. So generally, they like soil to be wet all the way through if possible. So you can't really overwater them unless you have a bog forming. But to adequately water them, you want to be able to push your stick in the ground a foot to a foot and a half at any time when the tree's actively growing or making a crop. Once the fruit's off, you can back off a bit. But if it's below, say it's below 10 inches that you can push a stick down, that tree is affected by the drought, and it may drop its fruit. It may not grow anymore. It's thinking it's drying up. So you want to maintain the soil moisture at least a foot down. So whatever it takes. Now on most farms, they know that you can use less water if you water all the time. In other words, if you constantly drip, you will use less water than if you flood it once a day. Especially if you flood it once a week, you're going to have to use the most water to keep that area from drying out, because most of that water is lost too deep. So most farms water once a day, but there are some farms, they said, that water 18 times a day now, and they're using less water. because you lose a lot when you go too deep. If you water too deep, you lose a lot that way. So it's better to and the other thing they found out, and they did this in an almond orchard, if you water a little bit every day versus heavy once a week, the root system's a lot bigger. Everyone's trying to convince you it's the opposite. Water once a week deeply, and the roots will try to follow that water. And when they actually did the studies in an orchard, it was exactly the opposite. They had a much deeper root system when they watered shallow, lightly every day. Pardon?
More wide area.
Yeah, they were using micro sprinklers. But, so, the research was correct, I think. So water lightly. So, when you have these droughts, I don't know, water district, it makes it too simple. Just don't water, it's what they want you to do, just don't water. But if you water lightly every day, your plants can get by with less water than if you water deeply once a week or twice a week, which is what they want you to do. So.
Water in between, we have to have dry time between water.
Not any truth to that I know of.
Question about cherry.
Mhm.
I know there's an advertisement about tart cherries. You can do it just for the health inflammation. You're not trying
We can't grow tart cherries.
Tart cherries is different tree.
Yeah. Yeah, there are different species. So we've tried them. Montmorency, which is a pie cherry. They haven't done well. They need more cold. So none of those things. So yeah, I should have mentioned cherry trees do need better drainage than apricots, and they're probably the most sensitive other than avocado and persimmon. So cherry trees, if the area stays too wet, if it's a low spot in your yard and it stays swampy for any length of time, you might lose your cherry trees. The roots may rot out. So they're a little more sensitive. So rotting occurs when the water just sits there and sits there and sits there, especially as the weather warms up. The trees start using the oxygen in the water, and if the water's not moving anywhere and the oxygen runs too low, the roots suffocate and they rot. If the water's moving, because tap water, irrigation water's got enough oxygen in it. So as long as you keep replacing the water with fresh water, the tree's roots can breathe. But if the water stagnates there and doesn't move anywhere, then it rots. Or if you have compost in the ground, it rots real fast. The compost is using up all the oxygen that the roots wanted as it decomposes.
I have another question. You're talking about apricot. For Japanese apricot, Prunus mume.
Oh, good question.
Can we grow?
You can grow it, it may not fruit. So Prunus mume, my dad grew them for 30 years in a low spot at our first nursery. He got 2 crops in 30 years. So in 2 years, we had enough chill for them. So the chill on them is probably right around 400 hours. And that was a white single-flowered mume. There's pink-flowered ones, there's double-flowered ones. We've never gotten any of those to fruit at all. But the white single-flowered one fruited for us twice, but we think the chill is right around 400 on them. So he made umeboshi twice. His friend's wife knew how to make the pickled.
But these four flowers, no fruit.
Yeah, they can bloom, but unless they get the cold, they just didn't. I guess they didn't develop well enough to get the fruit going. I don't know. They also may need a pollinator. I don't know. But he just had one tree all by itself, and it fruited twice. So.
Well, another question about the soil. We tested our soil was about 60 to 65% sand. So the sand is good. So when we plant the trees or any trees, can I add peat moss and fertilizer?
Don't need to. You've got perfect soil. If it's sandy loam, you've got.
Don't need to.
That's exactly what a farmer wants: is sandy loam, which looks like that. This is off a farm in Irvine. The farmer there said this is the best soil he's ever farmed in. It's like 70% sand. They like that. Plants like that. 60 to 70%. Actually, this sample may be closer to 80% sand. I mean, I walked on his farm after he plowed it. It's like walking on a beach. It's hard to get anywhere. It's just so fluffy. Yeah. But that's the healthiest soil for roots is sand. No nutrition, but there's no nutrition in the ground anyway. You have to apply it.
Require more water.
More frequent water.
Yeah, more frequently.
Less water more frequently. So
Do you sell an equivalent for that?
you can buy this. It's dirt cheap. I mean, you know, you go to a building supply yard and they usually call it fill dirt.
Yeah.
Because that's what you fill a hole in the ground with. You don't use, you know, you can use sand, but it's more expensive because sand doesn't compact. This won't compact either. You can't use much clay, so they use this as fill dirt, or I don't know. I've heard fill sand, same thing.
Okay.
So it's just dirty sand, is what it is, but it's great soil for plants. Yeah, and you can even use this in containers that are large. In a small container, it won't drain well enough, but in a large container like this, it drains well enough. It works well because you know, as a kid, we grew all our plants in this.
So when you plant something in a pot, I could use peat moss if I wanted to save it.
You could make it lighter. Yeah, peat moss and sand was supposed to be the mix we were supposed to use in the nursery industry, but it's always been too expensive, so so all the nurseries went to sawdust and peat moss and sand, and they found out, oh, it's cheaper to go to sawdust. So everybody now uses sawdust or wood shavings, and sometimes that's it, and the plants all fail within a couple years. So
Can I use you plant the tree in it as a mulch or is that okay?
that's what they use in Australia. That's all they got. Works real well. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with leaves of any type. Walnut leaves, eucalyptus leaves have all been thought to cause trouble, but it's the trees, it's not their leaves that are causing the trouble.
Live
Yeah, live oak, that's oak leaf mold.
How about pine needles?
That's real good.
Is it?
Yeah. Yeah, we've got people who grow blueberries swearing they put pine needles this deep. The blueberries love it. Nice acidic reaction on that. But the pine tree is the problem. Even if it's 50 foot away, the roots are in your yard stealing all your water. So that's the problem with any big tree within a couple hundred feet of you can be stealing all the moisture of your yard. So you have to watch the moisture in the ground.
Yeah, they're 5 feet and there's 10 of them
Yeah,
right along the wall.
yeah, it makes it real hard to garden. You have to water those pine trees to keep your plants alive.
One plus is we get a lot of needles from his tree.
Or grow a lot of things in pots.
Make lemonade.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.